Thomas Jackson, an aging man with deep lines etched across his face, was dragged into the heart of the vessel. His posture was hunched, his steps slow, but his eyes, hidden beneath a veil of sagging eyelids, were sharp, constantly darting across the surroundings. To the aliens, he appeared nothing more than a weak, decrepit human, an easy capture in their latest raid on a small Earth settlement. They had no idea who he truly was, and that suited him perfectly. The two towering aliens on either side of Thomas barely glanced at him as they shoved him into the interrogation chamber. Their muscular, reptilian frames shimmered under the dim lights, their claws clicking menacingly on the floor. To them, this was routine. Humans were fragile, feeble creatures, and this old man seemed like no exception. They didn't bother to shackle him. What threat could he possibly pose? Thomas shuffled forward, doing his best to maintain the facade. His hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the effort of restraining the power and precision that had been honed over decades of military service. He had spent years as one of Earth's most brilliant tacticians, but here, he was just another prisoner, a role he had chosen to play. "Get in there, human," one of the guards hissed, its voice low and guttural. It shoved Thomas forward, making him stumble into the room. He fell hard onto his knees, the sharp pain a reminder that his body, though aged, was still resilient. He bit his lip, grunting softly, and allowed himself to stay down a moment longer than necessary, playing the part of a broken man. Inside the chamber, the alien commander waited, sitting behind a massive steel desk, eyes glowing faintly under a ridge of bony scales. It was clear from his cold expression that he saw Thomas as little more than a curiosity. The commander leaned forward, examining his prisoner with a sneer. "This is what Earth sends now," the alien said, his voice dripping with condescension. An old man, feeble and helpless. Thomas said nothing, simply blinking up at him as if confused. It wasn't time to reveal anything yet. The commander chuckled softly, rising to his feet and circling the human. "You humans are pathetic," he continued. "Your people scatter like insects, and you, the oldest of them, will be of no use to us. You'll die here forgotten." Thomas remained silent, keeping his gaze low. Inside, he was calculating. The chamber had 2 guards, both stationed near the door. The commander carried no visible weapons, an act of arrogance that Thomas would exploit when the time came. The room itself was sparse, except for the desk and a small panel to the left, likely some form of communication or security system. It was vital he learned its functions without drawing attention to himself. The commander crouched before Thomas, his face mere inches away, inspecting him with cold, reptilian eyes. I wonder if you even understand what's happening here," he mused aloud. "You humans are so fragile, so limited." Thomas resisted the urge to smile. Limited. It was the same mistake all of them made. The aliens had no idea that the human they'd captured had allowed himself to be taken. This wasn't a misstep. It was the culmination of months of strategy, all leading to this moment. He had one goal: to locate the hidden alien stronghold and relay its coordinates to the human forces waiting in the outer sector. The aliens thought they had captured a broken old man, but in reality, they had taken the bait. As the commander rose and turned to the control panel, Thomas's mind raced. He knew he had limited time before his window of opportunity would close. But rushing things now would cost him the mission and countless lives along with it. Patience was critical. The commander signaled the guards with a flick of his clawed hand. "Take him to the holding cells. We'll deal with this one later." The guard stepped forward, hoisting Thomas to his feet with far more force than necessary. He winced, allowing himself to appear fragile once again. As they escorted him out of the room, he kept his head down, masking the fire in his eyes. The first stage of his plan was complete. He had gotten deep inside the alien ship without suspicion. Now came the harder part, gathering intel without revealing his true identity. As the doors of the holding area slid open with a hiss, Thomas felt the weight of his mission pressing against him. The stakes were enormous, but this was what he lived for. He'd been underestimated his entire career, always seen as the quiet strategist who let others take the glory. But in war, the quiet ones often dealt the deadliest blows. They tossed him into a cell, its cold walls closing around him, the door sealed shut, and the guards left without another word. Alone now, Thomas's posture straightened just a little. The facade remained, but beneath it, his mind was already at work. The aliens had no idea that they'd just handed the humans the key to their downfall. He allowed himself a small, almost imperceptible smile as he leaned back against the wall. Let them think he was beaten. Soon enough, they'd see just how wrong they were. The cold isolation of the cell wasn't a hindrance for Thomas Jackson. It was an opportunity. His keen eyes darted across the room, absorbing every detail. The layout, the location of the cameras, the ventilation shafts. It was all useful, but his focus remained on the rhythm of the alien guards' patrols. The ship had a methodical flow, a pattern he could exploit. Thomas settled against the cell's wall, resting his head back, eyes half closed in a meditative state. His calm demeanor belied the intensity of his thoughts. He needed more than just an escape plan. He needed the precise location of the alien stronghold and details on their defenses. Time was ticking, and his troops were waiting for his signal. Every second wasted was a second closer to the aliens launching their next assault on Earth. A sudden noise snapped him out of his thoughts. The cell door slid open with a hiss, and two guards appeared, gesturing for him to stand. Without protest, Thomas rose slowly, keeping his movements lethargic. They guided him down a long, dimly lit corridor, their sharp, clawed feet echoing off the metallic floor. As they moved deeper into the ship, Thomas took mental notes. He counted each turn, noted each door, and gauged the size of the ship from the slight changes in the hull's curvature. Every detail was important. The guards led him into a larger chamber, a command center, filled with alien officers, screens flashing in the alien language, and several stations displaying tactical data. Thomas's heart quickened, though he showed no outward sign of it. This was exactly what he needed. He was dragged toward a corner, where a group of officers, some hunched over data terminals, others engaged in heated conversation, barely gave him a passing glance. The aliens were too confident, too assured of their superiority. To them, Thomas was just a harmless old man being paraded past their most sensitive operations. From his position, Thomas could overhear their discussions. The alien language was complex, but after months of undercover work, he had learned enough to understand their chatter. What he heard was critical. They were discussing the coordinates of their hidden outpost, the heart of their war machine. He strained to hear more, mentally cataloging everything. One of the screens caught his eye. It showed a map, stark, geometric shapes representing human and alien territories. The alien outpost, nestled in a nebula at the edge of the human frontier, blinked ominously on the screen. Their defenses were stronger than expected, but Thomas noted a potential weakness, a gap in their patrols. It was small, but enough for a coordinated human strike. Suddenly, one of the officers barked an order, and the guards pulled Thomas toward the exit. He pretended to stumble, his body pressing against one of the control panels for a brief second before the guards yanked him away. It was long enough. His cybernetic implant, hidden deep within his arm, activated, pulling the data from the terminal and silently transmitting it back to the human fleet. It was a risk. If the aliens detected the transmission, the mission would be over. But the gamble paid off. The guards were too preoccupied with keeping up their show of force to notice. Thomas was led back to his cell, but his mind was racing. He had what he needed: the location, the weaknesses, and the timing. Now he had to find a way to relay it to his waiting forces. He slumped down in the corner of his cell, appearing defeated, but in his mind, every piece was falling into place. The guards' footsteps faded as they left, and Thomas finally allowed himself a moment to breathe. He reached into the hidden compartment of his uniform, retrieving a small, nondescript device no larger than a coin. This was his key to victory, a transmitter designed to send a pulse to the human fleet, revealing the alien outpost location. It was small, but powerful enough to reach the strike force waiting in the shadows of a nearby asteroid field. Activating it would be dangerous. The moment he did, the aliens would know something was wrong. The transmission would have to be timed perfectly with his escape. But Thomas had always thrived under pressure. He pressed the device against the wall, ensuring it was in direct contact with the ship's external hull, and sent the signal. There was no turning back now. The humans would be mobilizing, ready to strike. Thomas just had to survive long enough to escape the ship. The lights in his cell flickered as the power fluctuated, an indication that the aliens might have detected the transmission. His pulse quickened. The next few hours would be critical. He leaned back against the wall, letting the silence settle around him, his mind running through potential escape routes and contingencies. Then, a distant rumble shook the walls. The sound of engines powering up. Thomas's eyes narrowed. The aliens were preparing for something. Either they were mobilizing their fleet, or they were on to him. Either way, the clock was running out. The low hum of the alien ship grew louder as the engines roared to life, vibrating through the walls of Thomas's cell. He remained motionless, his eyes closed, focused. The moment had come. His signal had been sent, and the human strike force was on its way. But now the real challenge began, surviving long enough to witness the final blow. The door to his cell slid open with a sharp hiss, and Thomas's eyes snapped open. 2 guards rushed in, their expressions tense, no longer treating him as a harmless prisoner. Something had changed. They were on edge, their posture rigid, as if they suspected something but couldn't quite put it together. "Up!" one of them snarled, jabbing at Thomas with the butt of a weapon. Thomas moved slowly, playing the part of the weak old man for just a moment longer. His muscles coiled beneath his weathered exterior, ready to spring into action. As he stood, he allowed a brief smile to flicker across his face, just enough to unnerve the guards. Their eyes narrowed in confusion, but they didn't have time to react. With a speed that defied his age, Thomas lashed out. His hand shot forward, catching the first guard by the throat. In one swift motion, he slammed the alien's head against the steel wall with a sickening thud. The second guard fumbled for his weapon, but Thomas was already moving. He twisted the rifle out of the alien's hands and struck him across the head, sending the creature crumpling to the floor. Thomas stood over the fallen guards, breathing heavily. The years had not dulled his combat instincts. He grabbed the rifle and moved toward the door, his mind already calculating the fastest route to the ship's hangar. The human strike force would be arriving soon, and he needed to be ready when they did. As he moved through the corridors, alarms began to blare. The aliens had detected the transmission. The ship was on high alert, but Thomas was ahead of them. He knew the layout of the vessel now, had memorized the paths and weak points. His every step was precise, his mind focused on the goal. He slipped into a narrow passageway leading to the hangar bay, keeping to the shadows as alien soldiers rushed past, their weapons drawn. They were preparing for a fight, but they had no idea what was coming. At last, Thomas reached the hangar. It was a vast, cavernous space, filled with sleek alien fighters and transport ships. He crouched behind a stack of crates, surveying the scene. Alien officers barked orders, organizing their forces, unaware that the human fleet was already closing in. Then, in the distance, a low rumble shook the ground. Thomas grinned. The humans had arrived. The first human ships descended from the void, sleek and bristling with weapons. They moved with terrifying precision, launching a volley of missiles toward the alien stronghold. The aliens scrambled to respond, but it was too late. Thomas's intelligence had exposed the outpost vulnerabilities, and the human fleet exploited them with brutal efficiency. Explosions rocked the hangar as the alien ships were torn apart by human firepower. Thomas wasted no time. He sprinted toward a nearby transport, slipping inside just as another blast shook the ship's hull. He fired up the controls, his hands moving with practiced ease. Within moments, the ship lifted off the ground, slipping out of the hangar and into the chaos of battle. From his cockpit, Thomas watched as the alien outpost burned. The once imposing stronghold was crumbling under the relentless human assault, its defenses shattered. The aliens had been utterly unprepared for the precision and ferocity of the human strike force. As Thomas's ship soared away from the battlefield, a sense of grim satisfaction settled over him. This was a turning point. The humans had struck a devastating blow, one that would cripple the alien war effort for months, if not years. But the victory came at a cost. Thomas knew this was just one battle in a long war. The aliens would regroup, and Earth would need to be ready for whatever came next. Still, for now, humanity had the upper hand. They had proven once again that they were not to be underestimated. As Thomas set a course for the human fleet, a message crackled through his comms. "General Jackson, this is Commander Harris. We're reading your signal. The strike was a success. Welcome home." Thomas leaned back in his seat, exhaustion finally settling into his bones. "Thank you, Commander. We hit them hard today, but this war isn't over." "Understood, General," Harris replied. "But today we celebrate." Thomas allowed himself a brief smile. Today, at least, they had won. But in the back of his mind, he was already thinking ahead, planning the next move, preparing for the next battle. The war was far from over, but as long as humanity had fighters like him, the aliens would never know peace. As the stars stretched out before him, Thomas Jackson, the old man they had underestimated, knew one thing for certain. This was just the beginning.